Hello, my friends. Welcome to Lindy's Magpie Reads, and welcome to the sound of crows. I don't know what they're going on about, but hopefully it won't be for too much longer. This is going to be a short video, I hope, because I just want to catch up with the books I've read since my last video and before I head off on my next trip, going to Stratford for a week. So yes, 4 books to tell you about. And I also want to take you on a brief little tour when I walked from my home in Vic West to the library in downtown Victoria. So a few brief little bits. I was actually inspired by Elisabeth of Bouquins and Books because she took us on a tour from the library to the National Gallery, looking at pieces of public art along the way. That was such a charming video. I will link it down below. And I also want to thank so many other booktubers who have been participating in Framed in September, the art readathon, and for doing the second prompt in particular, to experience art, and the bonus prompt, which is to create a piece of art or tell us about some art that you admire. And there are so many great videos out there, so you can look for these with the hashtag Framed in September or Art Readathon. I haven't put them together in a playlist, but that would be a great idea. I'm making a mental note of it. Maybe one of the co-hosts of Framed in September has done that. Please put a note in the comments if you have. And all of the details about Framed in September and the co-hosts, Elisabeth, Heather, Hannah, and Greg, will also be in the description box. So, on to my little walk. From my house, I can easily connect to the Galloping Goose Trail, which is a combined walking and cycling trail. And at this point, I am under the Point Ellis Bridge, also called the Bay Street Bridge, where there's a piano just there in all weather, people to play if they want to. You can see the gorge in the background, and there is a working shipyard there. So as I walked by, I saw work being done on a BC ferry that was being refurbished. So next I walked over the Johnson Bridge, and there's this really interesting piece of art at the downtown side of the bridge. It's called Commercial Canoe, and the artist is Illyrian Gallant. The artist says that it symbolizes the canoe as the vessel of commerce which plied the local coastal waters pre-European contact. The sculpture is reminiscent of my canoe trips in Ontario's Algonquin Park, when the canoe made a scraping sound when it drifted in the reeds. Traditionally, First Nations would harvest rice in waterways by tapping ripened kernels into the canoes. Thus, the red seed pods depict starch as a commodity. The canoe is made from raw aluminum. The green and the red are a powdered finish on steel. I learned that originally this work of sculpture was installed in Bastion Square in 2008, and it was moved to its present location in 2020. And from there, I walked to Bastion Square, where there's a used bookstore called Bastion Books, and I went in for a little peek. I only went through the authors whose names started with A and with B, and I will be back to check it out, more titles in the future. But I did find a copy of Georges Bougnet's The Forest, which I was considering. In the end, I decided not to buy it, but look how cozy the interior is in this bookstore with these inviting armchairs to sit in. And then back at Bastion Square, there's this, I guess it's called a mural, even though it's on the ground. A floral? I don't know. I don't know what the word is. The painted words, "More justice, more peace," are on the brick cobblestones of the square. And I love seeing this every time I come through here. I'm not going to show you the rest of getting to the library, but I did go back a slightly different route. So I would go through Chinatown, and so I could show you the Chinese public school. Now, the history behind this it's sad, because in 1908, the Victoria Public School issued an ordinance that Chinese-born students could not attend public school until they had learned English. And so that's why this school was built. I wasn't quick enough to catch a group of students who looked like they were, 10, 11, 12, who were going into the building, but I did learn since then that the building is still being used by the Chinese community here for supplemental education. And finally, here is the Zodiac crosswalk. No zebras here. And you can also see the Gate of Harmonious Interest. That's at the entrance to Chinatown. Okay, so much for a little tour of art and architectural features in Victoria, British Columbia. I am on to the 4 books that I have finished since my last video, starting with a couple that I read for Shorty September. Now look at this one, 68 pages. It's an indoor kind of girl, short stories by Frankie Barnet. So when I was looking for something from my shelf for Shorty September, I pulled this off and realized that there's a novel out by Frankie Barnet right now that I'm on the waiting list for at the library, but somehow I hadn't connected that I already owned a collection of her stories. Anyway, there it was. Barnet is a Montreal-based writer, and the publisher of this, Metatron, is also a Montreal-based publisher. And their website says that they focus on edgy, subversive, and provocative books and writing that don't fit into pre-existing literary canons or traditions. And yeah, I would say that this definitely fits into that category. There's weirdness to it or absurdity. So for example, in one, the apartments are infested with things like butterflies or tiny turtles instead of the normal kind of bed bug infestation. So there are 5 stories in here, and they feature women who are in their 20s, and they're stories about female friendships and relationships. And they have jobs like working at a call center where they're instructed to pretend that they live in New York City and they have to talk with an American accent. Another one, the job is working with animal care at a zoo and trying to get a capybara to mate. And another job, wait staff at a conference center where they serve big meals. But the focus is more on dealing with the after effects, the trauma of having been in a dysfunctional family or having had an abortion, that kind of more serious things. In addition to living a life where you smoke too much weed, drink too much alcohol, and I want to give you a flavor. The next morning, I hinged forward over the toilet and waited. It was like my bile was trying to jump up my throat, but was too tired. It was like tryouts for a high jump team. The bile had bright yellow uniforms. Kathy was still asleep on the couch. And that is one of her own paintings on the cover. And she has also done her own graphic novel, both the illustrations and the text. And it's called Kim, a Novel Idea. And I am definitely going to pick that one up, in addition to waiting for her new novel that's Mood Swings. That one is described as being set in a world not unlike our own. And there's a young Instagram poet who falls in love with a billionaire, and he's promising that he's got this time travel machine that is going to make the world normal again. So I'm intrigued. And next is this classic, The Lover by Marguerite Duras. I just finished it yesterday, and I'm doing this as a buddy read with Sarah of Roadworthy and my subscriber Louise from Australia. And I am mystified, both with what exactly is happening in this novel. So I'm glad that I have two buddy readers to discuss it with, and we're not finished the discussion yet. But also, I'm mystified why so many people love it, because I find it distressing. It kind of makes me cringe in places, but at the same time, it has kind of got under my skin. So, maybe that's part of the appeal, but I feel like this book hasn't settled with me yet. So I might have more to say about, I definitely will have more to say about it, more to think about. It's a story of a 15-year-old girl who has a brief love affair with a man 12 years older than herself. She's white, living in Saigon. Her family's very poor, and he is Chinese, and his family is very rich. So apparently this is based on the author's own experiences. And there's something dreamy about the writing that has really, that part really appeals to me. So yeah, all of these flags. But some of those flags are for passages that I'm like, what? What's happening here? So tell me if you have a take on this novel, please, in the comments down below, because everything can help. I haven't started exploring what other people have said about it yet, but that's the stage that I'm at now. And this is another Shorty September. It's about 118 pages, so 2 books for Shorty September. The information about the co-hosts for Shorty September, Bert and Heather, I'm going to have that in the description below in case you've missed out, if you're new to BookTube or new to this channel. And yeah, Shorty September is great. Good time to pick up those shorter books. The reason why I picked up The Lover in the first place is because 2 books that I read partly concurrently, or one after the other, both mentioned that this was a favorite book. So the novel Indian Winter by Kazim Ali, and also the memoir Committed by Suzanne Scanlon. So when I talked about it on my channel, that, maybe I should read this book because I've heard about it so much, that's how Sarah and Louise both said, okay, let's read this together. And that's how that all came about. Next up is an audiobook, Carmageddon. It's by a British journalist, Daniel Knowles. The audiobook is read by Kristen Coulson. The author does say that he has militant anti-car tendencies, so be prepared for that. This book is right up my alley, not having owned a car since the year 2000. He talks about the history of car ownership and city urban planning and how cars have affected cities and our well-being in cities, the bylaws that mandate parking needs. He talks about how it's been proven that if people have to pay for parking, they often realize they don't actually need it, or they can make their trip without their vehicle. The idea of changing parking minimums in order to allow more room for housing is something that came up in another book that I read recently, Gregor Craigie's book, Our Crumbling Foundation. Daniel Knowles talks about Robert Moses, who was a city planner in New York City, and his biography by Robert Caro called The Power Broker, which won a Pulitzer when it came out in the 1970s. So on the podcast 99% Invisible, they did, I think, a 12-part series on this biography and on all of the things about Robert Moses that I found really interesting. So I haven't read the book, but I have listened to the podcast discussion of it. And he also talks about Jane Jacobs and how she thwarted Robert Moses' plans to put a highway right through Washington Square Park, and her book, The Life and Death of American Cities, which I have read and recommend. Now, the powerful car manufacturing lobby comes up often in this book, and also the skullduggery. So like Volkswagen, when it circumvented fuel emissions tests on their diesel fuel cars, and also General Motors making false claims about the safety of leaded gasoline. There are so many astounding facts and figures in this book, so I'm just going to share with you some of the stuff about lead. He says the levels of lead in our blood have dropped since leaded fuel stopped being used, but its effects are still with us. The World Health Organization has reported that leaded gasoline has caused more exposure to lead than any other source worldwide. One of the effects of lead poisoning in childhood is the reduction in people's self-control when they grow up. And some studies claim that leaded gasoline may explain as much as 30% of the enormous crime wave that grew in the post-war period in the United States. The murder rate began dropping 30 years after leaded gasoline was phased out. The concentration of lead in the average child aged 1 to 5 fell from 15 micrograms per deciliter in 1976 to 2.8 micrograms per deciliter in 2016. There's often the reminder that it's people who need to move around cities, not cars. And it's also been shown that when roads are closed to accommodate bicycles or for other reasons, it does not cause traffic congestion in other places on other roads. Instead, what happens is people mostly switch to other forms of transportation. It does also cite studies that show that people who commute on foot or by bicycle are happier in general than people who have to drive their car to get to where they're going. People who take public transport tend to be somewhere in the middle of those two. It talks about that certain faction of drivers who vociferously hate bicycles and bike lanes and anything that prevents them from driving fast, basically. And also that there's a viewpoint that's held by a number of people that bicycles aren't really a form of transportation and rather they're seen as something that you do for fun, and so bicycle lanes are seen as a luxury instead of part of a transportation plan. Now, the city that I live in, Victoria, has the most bicycle commuters of all of Canada, which partly makes sense because we're also considered the warmest city, I think, in Canada. 27% of all trips within the city are done by either walking, cycling, or rolling. And the goal is to get this over 50% in the next 5 or 10 years. A review in Publishers Weekly summed this book up with, "Though it's sharply argued and strongly supported, this sermon is best suited for the choir." But I guess I'm the choir because I thought it was great. And my last book is one that I picked up for Framed in September. It's Thunderclap, a memoir of art and life and sudden death by Laura Cumming. And I did this as a book, text, and audio combo. The audio is read by the author, and it was really important to me to have the book as I listened to the audio because there are so many full color illustrations of the paintings that she talks about. Laura Cumming is a British art critic and historian, and she is focusing on the golden age of Dutch painting, so mostly the 17th century, and her love and admiration for this art just comes through so strong. Her father was also a painter who loved Dutch art. So the memoir aspects mostly have to do with her memories of her father. She talks about a lot of different painters and their lives. Often they were quite poor, same as her father. Life as an artist is not very secure. But the main painter that is of interest to her is Carol Fabricius, who is famous, probably to most booktubers, famous as the painter who painted the Goldfinch. And there is a picture in here. It was on the cover of Donna Tartt's novel. And one of the thunderclaps of the title is the explosion in 1654 in Delft in the Netherlands. A gunpowder store exploded and it killed hundreds, including the painter Fabricius. There are so many great lines in here. I just have to read you a few. She said, "Paintings can take you anywhere, but they are also a land in themselves, a society, a place to be." It just makes me want to sit in front of a painting and look. And she does that a lot. In another place, she says, "I did not know how to be still, and I hardly do now, except perhaps in front of art. So my gratitude to artists is unending, and to me, these paintings by Coulson are life stilled, dense with the time taken to paint them and the appreciation of what is painted. They're not peaceful so much as pointed, not sedative, but poised in wonderment and awe. They slow my eyes and my thought, and they help with that hardest of all questions, how to live in the here and now." And you can hear some rolling going by, some carts rolling going by. That is because today there is a corn roast going on our street, just up the block. It's closed off to traffic, and it's corn roast time. So I'm going to be going down there to watch zucchini car races and a dog show and who knows what else, what kind of fun people get up to here. Before that, so here's some of Coulson's paintings. still lifes. And the way that she describes paintings, it just makes you look at them in new light. For example, this one here, she talks about his hat being so large that it has its own planetary halo. I've actually still got another 40 pages to go, and 1 hour in the audiobook, but I am going to finish it by the end of today, so I'm including it. And that is all I've got. Sorry, this is a little bit scattered and lots of action going on up and down the street. So thank you for your patience. Thank you for watching, and I hope you will say hello in the comments down below. Continue to enjoy reading about art, experiencing art, and maybe even creating some art. Happy reading, everyone. Bye for now.